Very proud to have you all here at Newsport for our first ever French presidential debate, an event that we are happily organizing together with the thank Cindy Kranen, Noemi Abaini, and Margot Leroux. I hope I'm pronouncing it all right. For cooperating with us in setting up this special event. Okay, and of course also, I don't think you missed anything. Got a loud voice, but I also want to say a very warm welcome to the people who are following this event online. Of course, very welcome as well. And why are we of Hague so interested in organizing this event? Well, firstly, we are a public affairs and communications agency, and we decided 1.5 years ago to start an own office in Paris. That's a big step. We already have an office here in The Hague, close by. We have an office in Brussels and Amsterdam, but now Paris. Why Paris? Well, it was of course because we noticed that after Brexit, a lot of the power has shifted within Europe, and the Netherlands has to find a new place within the EU and in between all these big countries. And we also saw a growing interest of Dutch companies into France. But at the same time, they find it sometimes difficult to understand the dynamics of French business and politics, which I can imagine. And at the same time, of course, a lot of people find the dynamics of the Dutch political developments very hard to understand. So we thought maybe we can build a bridge between those two countries as Hague, and happy to say to you that after 1.5 years of hard work, we've got our first clients in Paris, and we see our company grow over there. But this is not advertising, of course. Sorry, just explaining why we are so interested in the French presidential elections. Today we want to focus on decoding the French landscape and the impact of the French elections on business, politics, EU decision-making and diplomacy. Because we are at a very important crossroads, of course. At this stage, we thought in this debate, which has to be topical, we cannot ignore the situation, the war in Ukraine, and of course also what the presidential elections in France can mean for the dynamics around that conflict. What will be the position of the next French president towards Russia, for example? It's all, for the rest of Europe, a nail-biting and defining moment, and enough to discuss here today. So what we will do, we have two debates with two different panels of experts today. The first will focus on defense, the second on two other strategic sectors, energy and agri-food. And we are very happy to say that both debates will be moderated by Kees van Rij. He's a seasoned diplomat with a long experience in working in Europe and abroad for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I all wish you a very interesting evening, and I really want to give the floor to Kees van Rij. Kees, there you go.
Thank you. Do I need two micros?
No, only one.
No, only one? This one? Okay. Then I give this one back to you. Okay. Thank you very much, Peter, for your introductory remarks. And welcome to all participants here in Nieuwsport and those who follow us online. This is a very timely debate, as Peter already said. The second round of the French elections will take place on Sunday, and there's a lot at stake for France, the Netherlands, and Europe. And if you follow the news just today, there's even more reason to have a serious analysis of what's going on. And in my view, there is really something to choose from. The two candidates have very different positions on quite a number of things, including on the European cooperation, and of course, against the background of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Tomorrow, 20 April, there will be the only televised debate between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. It will take place in the evening. So this is an excellent moment to take some stock and to see how we can better understand between France and the Netherlands what is going on against all these challenges. So today we will focus on three major topics. The first panel will discuss the issues relating to defense and security. And the second panel will deal with energy and agri-food. Those are the three items that we will look at. We will be together for the next more or less 2.5 hours for an in-depth exchange into the French presidential elections, and we will compare the programs of the two candidates. We have, as I said, two debates of each 1 hour, one on defense and then one on energy and agri-food. The format is as follows. For each panel, the speakers will be invited to make a 5 minute, more or less 5 minute speech, sharing their views on the theme at hand. Then we will have a question and answer session with the audience in the room and online. For those of you in the room, you will be able to ask your questions directly. Our microphones will be ready by Sandrine and her colleagues. For those who join us online, you will see a pane on the right side of your screen where you can drop your question, and the online moderator will then pick them up and present the question to the panel. Last but not least, the event is recorded, so people will be able to follow it online, but also to see the recording after tonight. Without further ado, let's start the first debate on geopolitics and defense. Can I invite Ed Kronenberg, who is the former ambassador of the Netherlands to France and Beijing, and several other important postings and responsibilities, to come to the floor. And also I'd like to ask a very special guest today, Yevgeny Levchenko, who is currently the president of the Dutch Federation of Contract Football Players in the Netherlands, but who originally is from the Donbass and has extensive knowledge about the background of this terrible war. And I very much hope you would like to start with making a few comments. So please, can I invite the two of you?
Can we sit? Yep.
You can sit there.
Please. Because Yevgeny Levchenko, as I said, you have a background. Of course, you lived for a very long time as a professional football player in our country here, but you also were a famous football player in Ukraine. You have followed this conflict, this war, very intensely, and you have had some very, I would say, successful in terms of explanation of the backgrounds on the television in the Netherlands. So yesterday evening was the last one.
Yep.
So I think we would all be very grateful before we really start delving into the security and geopolitical dimension for Europe, to hear your views, and also maybe to hear how, from the point of view of Ukraine, would they like to be helped and assisted by Europe. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me here. I'm Yevgeny Levchenko. I was born in Ukraine. Actually, I was born in Soviet Union. This is the country that not exist anymore. And in 1991, Ukraine, actually Soviet Union, fell apart. Everybody knows it, fell apart, and Ukraine became independent country. Independent in a way we were not rely on any other countries. We were happy to be by ourselves, but definitely the way how Russia was with us all this time was really, really intense, I would say, because Russia has always this strategic eye on us, and always Ukraine was like a small brother for Russia on the paper. So I was born in Donbas region. Donbas region is at this moment, I think, the most difficult part of Ukraine, where fights going on, where people get killed, where you can see every day in news people get arrested, and the second way of war become a reality. We all see that at this moment Ukrainian troops trying to find a way to fight with Russia, and as I see, this is not a really honest, not a fair fight, because in my opinion, if you want to have honest fight, you have to be able to fight with similar weapons. I have many friends who fight on the front line, and all of them from beginning they were saying, okay, we understand that Europe cannot send us people from Europe. That would be a very pleasant but not realistic way to help us. But all of them who fight in difficult parts like Mariupol, you know, Mariupol is this point. It's a hell on earth, I would say, because people dying like, I don't know, no water, no electricity, no food, and they are surrounded there. So they said, if we have right weapons, we would get Mariupol back within a week. Can you imagine people stay in this place, still children stay in this place, and they know they can survive, but they don't have right weapons to fight? I can understand that really, really tough and really hard to digest it, actually. So in my opinion, as I see on a social part, for example, Dutch and Europe helping a lot. I have so much admire for people from all the countries. Poland, for example. Poland made a lot of offer to Ukrainian people. The Netherlands also. Yes, they have been to refugees camp. We give a lot of football to some young people. But all of them, this is so hard at this moment to understand. If we want to change something, we need to act more harder. We need to speak more louder about this problem, about this war. If you don't do it, you will lose all the time, because this is like a chess. In chess, you have to think about your opposition always in front. And at this moment, I don't like to say it, but Putin always winning from us. So in my point of view, we need to act more harder, more. And I understand no one wants war. I understand that it's really safe place to stay here in Europe. And same for me. I don't want war. I don't want the people here get in trouble. But if you don't act, the whole Europe will be in problems. I'll tell you, because next step will be Moldova. Next step will be Lithuania, Latvia, and yeah, that's the point of view of my. Yeah. Yeah, what can I say about Ukrainian people? They are so brave. I tell you a story. I met Zelensky once, the president of Ukraine. I spoke with him when he was just a comic, just a guy who was performing on the stage like this. But at this moment, as I see how he changed from the guy who just performing and make jokes to really strategically strong person with his knowledge, with his right people around him, and he's not running away. Mm-hmm. And that's for me a very important thing about people who become heroes in this war.
Thank you very much, Evgeny, with your testimony, and give us some insight on things also you hear from your country. And I think we can all share your analysis. It's a very serious situation indeed. I would also like to welcome Jean-Dominique Giuliani. Do you hear me?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Perfect. Good to see you again. It's a long time. It has been a long time.
Yes.
I would like you, Jean-Dominique, and Ed Kronenberg. And Jean-Dominique, of course, is well known as the chairman of the Fondation Robert Schuman. Ed, as I already said, was previously ambassador of the Netherlands to France and China. I think it would be interesting to start with you, Jean-Dominique, to enlighten us on the defense, geopolitical, security issues when it comes to the presidential election, the second round, this coming Sunday, and how the candidates are positioning themselves. I think your analysis, and we all know about your very frequent newsletter, your broad ideas, of course, but I think it would be interesting to focus a little bit on these issues and to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very difficult for me to speak after our Ukrainian friends with this very moving testimony. And I share this emotion. And be sure that in France, many people are sharing this emotion, and they are aside the Ukrainian people. I am abroad in a small village in France, and everybody wants to do something to help our Ukrainian friends facing this horrible military aggression, this war. And and I'm very happy also to meet Ambassador Cronenberg that I had the privilege to meet in Paris. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon. So we will have our second round of this very important election. You know that in France, the presidential election is the main rendezvous, the main political rendezvous on the political scene, because our president, since the beginning of this Fifth Republic in 1958, is the most powerful politician, the most powerful actor on the scene. He has the power to dissolve the National Assembly. He conducts the foreign affairs policy and the military too, when you know we are a nuclear power, and he designed the prime minister. He could resign him, and he's very powerful. So this election is very important for our country. Every 5 years since 2000, before 2000, the mandate of the president was for 7 years. Right now, 5 years. And after this election, we will have 1 month later legislative election. We will elect our member of parliament. So, generally speaking, the the French people, they are very, very involved in the presidential election. And after that, they vote for the parliament quite the same side. So we had a first round, very, very specific and very special, with very powerful rejection of the outgoing president. Every time we had this kind of rejection because the president concentrate all the critics, all the insatisfaction of these very turbulent people. The French people are politically turbulent, and they don't want to give some green light to everything, every policy, everybody. They are complaining sometimes, and they are for very, very often in the street to protest and to demonstrate. So it's very difficult for an outgoing president to face a re-election. And since 50 years, right now, we only have 2 presidents re-elected in specific conditions, because it was what we used to call the cohabitation. Before 2000, the mandate of the president was for 7 years, and the National Assembly for 5 years. Sometimes the French people have sent a different majority in the National Assembly and at the president. So we had a prime minister who was elected directly by the National Assembly, and during these circumstances, the 2 presidents, François Mitterrand and Jacques Chirac, could have been re-elected because they were opposed to the majority of the National Assembly and the Prime Minister. But since 2000, every outgoing president has been beaten for a re-election. So it's very difficult for Emmanuel Macron to succeed, to be re-elected, but in fact, nobody could imagine in France right now that Marine Le Pen could be re-elected. Why? Because if during this first round we had more 55% of extremist votes, Marine Le Pen suffered some lack of credibility on economic issues and on diplomatic issues, because she, do you hear me? Yes, because,
yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. Because I have a special signal telling me that it was weak. Marine Le Pen is, in the past, has been very close to Vladimir Putin and the Russian, as the extremists used to be in France. From the left and from the right, they used to be, first of all, anti-American and consequently pro-Russian and pro-Putin. And this is this main weaknesses for this election. On the contrary, Emmanuel Macron, as you know, is a real pro-European president. He has made a lot of proposals to revive the EU, to try to improve the cooperation with your country, with Germany, and with the other also. I think that he has visited every EU country since the beginning of his mandate. He is a real European-oriented president, maybe one of the most after Giscard d'Estaing, we used to have 30 years ago. And the big issue on international affairs for this election is against Russia or against America. And I do believe that the French people, they prefer really to be in the NATO, to be a friend with the American, and also they are very shocked and very worried about the Russian aggression of Ukraine. So I do believe that this will be the most important issue on Sunday, on next Sunday.
Thank you very much, Jean-Dominique Giuliani. Can I pass the floor to Ed Kronenberg to hear your comments, and then we will have occasion for some questions, answers, and comments.
Thanks a lot, Kees, and thank you, Yevgeny, for your moving testimony. And Jean-Dominique, good to see you again, and thank you for your contribution to our debate. Actually, we were planning for this event quite a long time ago, and as such, of course, the French presidential elections are very important in their own right, but we couldn't realize at the time how the significance would be as we are speaking today. The French elections are still very important, but they have a very, let's say, global meaning as well, and European meaning, because I'm convinced that the outcome of the elections will also decide on the future of Europe, but we can come to that in the debate later on. It's actually a coincidence that some 75 years ago, the General de Gaulle was giving a speech in Rennes, and it was a period of quite some turmoil in France and having a lot of problems with the communists, and he was warning against the Russians and against the communists. Now, I could sort of assume that he might, if he would still be alive, give the same sort of speech again today. And at the time he said, well, you know, the Russians are only 500 kilometers from our borders. And to make his point, he said it's only 2 stages of the Tour de France for them to reach the French border. Now, in those days, of course, the stages of the Tour de France were a bit longer than they are these days. But nevertheless, it was too close for comfort. And when we see what's happening today, I think these words should be sort of looked into again to realize how important the threat is. And you alluded to that already, that we are facing today. I feel that we have to give credit where credit is due, and that is to President Macron, who of course coined the expression of strategic autonomy of Europe already very early on in his presidency, when he gave his very famous speech at the Sorbonne in October 2017. And he's been a very strong proponent of the strategic autonomy ever since, not just in the, let's say, security point of view, but also in other very important areas like economic independence and independence in other areas as well. Now, admittedly, when he made this statement and when he gave the speech, it was a very different geopolitical context. It was actually the period that President Trump at the time started to pick his fight with Xi Jinping. And obviously Macron wanted to avoid that we would be caught in the middle, and he felt that Europe should stand up and have its own independent position and should not be forced by either one of these superpowers to choose sides. It was also the time that, I'm talking about 2017, 2018, that the EU was waking up to the fact that there was a China around. Yeah, we know the country was there, but until then, I witnessed myself, we didn't really sort of realize what was going on in China, that it had become a real superpower, not just from an economic point of view, but also from a political and military point of view. And also the European Union woke up to that fact and started calling, of course, as we know in their paperwork in 2019, China's systemic rival. I was a bit surprised at the time. I mean, I was in Beijing at the time, and I mean, the phraseology was, well, quite sharp. And I was wondering why we weren't treating the Russians the same way, because if we were having problems, it was not with China, it was with Russia. I'm talking about 2019, this is 5 years after the Crimea, after separatists started to make trouble in the Donbas region, after the downing of MH17 and after all the terrible atrocities we witnessed in Syria, of course. But nevertheless, we focused a lot on China at the time and not so much on Russia. But the call from President Macron for strategic autonomy got a rather muted response in the other capitals of Europe, if a response at all. There was not a lot of enthusiasm from Germany, and also in the Netherlands there was not a reaction as far as I can recall. But of course things have changed in the meantime. And I can understand why at the time there was this muted response. I mean, even though the relationship between Germany and the United States was not that well at that point in time, they clearly didn't want to upset the transatlantic reliance, and they still had some hope apparently that if we would have to call on Article 5 in NATO, Trump would still heed the call, although I would have had my doubts at the time. But of course, the French president kept his strategic autonomy on the agenda. It came back in all the speeches that he gave since. And it's no coincidence that it also was on the French agenda for their presidency, the security issues. I mean, it was just a couple of months ago when it all started. And under the French presidency, the first informal meeting was a meeting of the ministers of foreign affairs and defense, just to focus on European defense capabilities. Unfortunately, and we heard the testimony, this devastating earthquake took place in Ukraine, and we've been trying to deal with it ever since. We're now into almost 2 months of fighting over there. And we started to realize, although we knew, but we started to realize because we could see it, that we are extremely vulnerable in Europe when it comes to our own defense capabilities. And we cannot even protect our own citizens. We have to rely on the United States, at least for the time being, to protect our own citizens. And I think that's highly irresponsible. I think Europe should be in a position and should have the means to take care of its own citizens. And I think we've been lucky so far that we still have an occupant in the White House that is rather sympathetic to NATO. But who's going to guarantee us that this will be the case also in a couple of years from now? And one of the positive things about the current situation is, if you can talk about any positive things, that apparently there's some convergence now starting to come about. And when you talk about European security issues and transatlantic security issues, because the two were, in the view of many people, rather mutually exclusive. Because even in the Netherlands, when you started to talk about European defense, it sent down the shivers on many spines and people in The Hague, because they were afraid that we were talking about the European army and things like that. While we were only trying to say, well, you need also very strong European defense also to make NATO much stronger. But we are still far in the European Union of a sort of Article 5 like we have in NATO, which is an automaticity. You know, one attack on the country is an attack on all others. And if you make this point, some people will say, yes, but we have Article 42.7, which, you know, tells European member states that they have to intervene when one of the countries is attacked. Well, that may be the case, but, you know, it's not a surprise that Sweden and Finland opt for membership of NATO, while they are members of the European Union. So they clearly still know where to get their security from, and they put their trust in NATO, and I think they rightly do so at this point in time. That doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't work very hard on our own strategic autonomy. And France, obviously, is going to be the country at the core of this European defense capability. It has nuclear capacities, and I think France is the only country at the time being which is capable of projecting force also outside of Europe. Now, there's still a long way to go. We have to increase our capabilities. We have to spend our money without having duplications in all the capabilities we are going to finalize. And this is why these elections are so crucial for us, because this will only work if President Macron is going to be re-elected. All of this will be off the cards when Le Pen is going to be in the Élysée. Forget about European defense, maybe even forget about NATO, because she said she's going to get France out of the integrated military command structure. So at this point in time, it would be a disaster for everybody, given the current situation. It would even encourage probably President Putin in making things worse, if it's still possible to make things worse at this point in time. So that's why I think these elections are so crucial, not just for France, but also for the Netherlands and for many other European countries. And I would like to call upon our politicians to acknowledge the fact that we need a very strong, independent European defense, not to weaken the NATO alliance, but to reinforce it, and to be sure that when push comes to shove, we are in a position to protect our own citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Well, this is very important and relevant comments from both of you. From Jean-Dominique and from Ed, and of course Evgeny. I would propose we ask some questions or comments that from you, and maybe you will allow me to ask the first question. My question is, and I've been reading a lot about the situation as it develops currently. We see two very different approaches. You described, of course, rightly the position and what is at stake if President Macron is not elected. But if you read what the candidate Le Pen is saying, I will take France out of the integrated command of NATO and I will stop the constructive cooperation with Germany. I get also some shivers there from my point of view of analyzing how the situation is. Is that assumption correct, Jean-Dominique? Will she actually do those things that she said she would do if she would be elected? What is your take?
Yeah, I don't really know if she will act like this, but I suppose yes, because this is the most important sign of his thought and his way of thinking. This is the way of thinking of the extreme right for a long time in France, maybe for 1 century. They are against Germany, they are against Americans, and if they try to hide this feeling, in fact, they are nationalists. This is pure nationalism, and this is totally archaic in the time being. And this push to go outside NATO, it's not the most important. The most important is the push toward Russia and against America and against our partners in the European scene. I do believe that it's a real danger from Marine Le Pen. We also have as the extreme link, the extreme right, extreme link, the same feeling that we will be better alone and we will strong alone. It's quite incredible that in 2022 some politician could argue like that. And I do believe that it's a real danger for all Europe, as Ambassador Cronenberg said, for our partners, our friends, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, European France. It could be the negation of maybe all the European construction from Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet to Giscard d'Estaing, Mitterrand, and Macron right now. It would be that we call in France a rupture, a strategic rupture for a long time.
Thank you very much. Can I invite the audience to ask some questions? And of course, online as well, of course.
So maybe to start with, we have one from our online participants. So basically, Russian elites state, in the statement, deny the right for Ukrainian state to exist. And therefore, is there any chance that Russia satisfies itself with the Donbass? And can we see a comparison with the 1939 USSR-Finland war? Is that valid according to you?
I think Russian will be satisfied with Donbass. We saw it, of course, with Crimea. The Crimea was a good example. In 1991, the Soviet Union fell apart. There was a clear agreement within all 15 republics who became independent countries. In 1992, Russia with Great Britain, with America, with Ukraine, signed the agreement, which was very important, Budapest Memorandum. And this memorandum was very important for Ukraine because we gave nuclear weapons that we had in change for integrity of the land. So all the borders, they were on the map, as you understand, with Crimea, with Donbass, should have been respected of the countries like Russia, Ukraine, America, and England. So it went quite well for a long time, but in 2014, we all know how brutally Russia took just like this Crimea. So, and then if I see how it went in my region, in Donbass region, yeah, that was just a piece of cake actually for Russia to make this war even more worse, because it became, how you call it, a hybrid war with a quite simple and easy way to collaborate with separatists. So people from Russia were sent to the Donbass region. They made some statements, they put some money, and they put people under pressure to actually become independent. It doesn't work actually, because I can tell you in Donbass region, of course you have Russian people, you have Russian-speaking people. There are big differences. You have people who want to be independent, and you have pro-Ukrainian people. So there are three groups. At this moment, after 6-7 years that Russia have been there are a lot of people who doesn't want to be with Russia anymore. And they said, okay, I don't want to be with Ukraine, I don't want to be with Russia, just leave us alone, I want to be just independent. So this is the situation at this moment. And if you talk about agreements with Russia, not with Russian people, but with Russian political establishment, I don't believe any single word about Russian politics. If you see Macron, with all due respect, Macron talk a lot about with Putin. I agree, this is the right way to talk with him, put sanctions, and give Ukrainian the right weapons. Only in this way you can achieve some changes. There is no soft power talk. There is no small talks anymore. If you want to change something, you have to definitely be more persuasive. You have to be put more pressure on it. And if you accept things, we have like in Russia, because I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian. So you understand my position at this moment. But in this conflict, in this war, I'm definitely for Ukrainian side. If you give Putin one finger, he took it all your arm, and he still have a hunger. Yeah.
No, thank you. Absolutely, and you have a point. Absolutely. Are there other questions from the audience? General Drosten.
Mr. Juliana, thank you for your contribution. Can you explain how the large immigrant population of France will vote this Sunday? Will they vote anyhow? Do they have to be Frenchmen? Do they have to be? Do they need a passport to vote? Can you explain what this group will do, might do?
Yeah, they have to be French, and they have to get the French nationality to vote. And if you have been born in France, you have the French nationality, including if you are from a foreign origin. But for the other, you have to get the French passport, the French identity, nationality. How can they vote? They vote in majority against Le Pen. But a small minority is very close to the extremist party, and I don't know really how they could react. But a majority will vote against Le Pen, that's quite sure. But if I may, because if I may add something to what Evgeny said after the question we had, it's not to us to tell what could be an agreement between Ukraine and Russia. We in France, in our history, in the past, at the end of the 19th, at the beginning of the 20th century, we had the same problem with Germany, with a part of our country, Alsace-Lorraine. And nobody could told us what to do with that. It's a part of our country. Crimea is a part of Ukraine. Donbass is a part of Ukraine. It's not to us to tell what could be an agreement. This is the responsibility of the Ukrainian people. If we don't think like that, it would be very dangerous. I share the Evgeny thinking about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Peter Torhorst.
Thank you, Mr. Giuliani. I have one question for you. If President Macron loses this election, what has been his biggest mistake?
During his mandate, he made a lot of reform. He has made a lot to reform, to modernize the French economy, the French social relationship, and it was sometimes quite brutal for some people. He made some mistake too, because he is a young politician, and we used to have older politicians like General de Gaulle, like Mitterrand, Jacques Chirac. They were quite moderate in their speeches, very consensual, and Macron is more direct, more cash. And I do believe for myself that it's good for the country, it's good for Europe, it's good for our economy, but he has made some enemies and strong enemies. There is a real rejection of his own personality because he is very, very cash, and you want to go forward, maybe sometimes too quickly.
There are also critics who say he has been too elitist. Is that true?
Maybe, yes, he has not the traditional history of a French politician. A French politician should have been elected in a small part of the country, maybe to be mayor of his city of origin, and after that member of parliament and member of some local assembly. Macron is like a surprise, a political surprise that has surprised all the political scene and the political parties 5 years ago, because the people, they were expecting something new. And right now that they had some reproach to make because there is too cash, maybe, but not really elitist. No, I don't know. This is the good word for that.
Thank you. Can I give the floor to another person? I saw a finger there. Yes, in the back. There are two gentlemen who'd like to ask a question. Please go ahead, sir.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your testimonies and your insights. There's an alternative narrative to how this conflict in Ukraine developed that is proposed most notably by Vladimir Posner, who's a journalist, and another one, for example, John Mersheimer at the University of Chicago. Basically, they said that there was a promise made in '88, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, that NATO would not advance, and yet it did, not once but twice. NATO is a gun that is pointed in only one direction, and that's east. And so in a world where you look at the balance of power, should you be the Russian one, then you see the gun coming closer and closer to you. Therefore, it seems to me that one of the problems of this conflict is NATO itself. How would you look at this question?
Maybe Ed?
Question mostly for you, sir. Yes.
Well, I don't agree because, I mean, first of all, even if NATO would have had a gun, I mean, it was empty. I mean, you know, it was no threat whatsoever at the point in time. I've been working at NATO myself. It's already some 20 years ago. But we had an excellent working relationship with Russia at the time. The Russian ambassador to NATO was having his office on the NATO compound in Brussels, and we had monthly meetings. So, I mean, NATO at that point in time was not at all perceived as a threat by Russia. This was not the way we were working together. So, of course, you can always try to make the argument that, you know, why would NATO have to expand? Why new members? Why did NATO include in its final conclusions of the Bucharest summit meeting in 2008 the fact that Ukraine and Georgia might become members? I mean, these are, I think, valid questions. But I don't agree when you would argue that, you know, there's been a threat from NATO and that the threat has been moving east all the time. That's definitely not the way it, I mean, of course, you will say, well, that's not the way NATO perceived it. But I'm convinced that neither Russia did perceive it like this at that point in time. Of course, they now use it as an argument, but that's a different story.
Can I add something? I think it's a big propaganda in Russia as well that NATO just trying to find the way to organize the war against Russia. I think there is maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I remember Vladimir Putin was saying that I would like to be a part of NATO.
Yeah.
And so in my opinion, I think NATO will never start a war yet, never start a war against any country.
Of course, they use, of course, Belgrade, you know, when we had the Balkans.
Not starting the war, but I mean, that's the big propaganda in Russia as well, that NATO around us. Yeah. I remember my youth, in my youth, the elderly people were telling me always, the West is coming, America is coming, they're gonna take our land, they wanna kill us. And you know, I lived till my 15s in this crazy world that I was afraid to talk to foreigners. Can you imagine it? That you are just living in your country and you just live in a country and you think, okay, everything who lives outside of Russia, Soviet Union, they are bad. They are only coming to kill you. That's the most of the propaganda thing that still exists in Russia. And imagine what's going to happen with Finland, with Sweden, if they become also the members of NATO. I mean, Russia would definitely act differently. And it's not about Finland, I tell you. It's only about Ukraine at this moment. Russia would like to show, on the case of Ukraine, to protect other countries They don't have to move. They don't have to. They have to listen to Russia. Otherwise, they will not survive.
Thank you. There was a question from the gentleman there.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you all three, Mr. Van Rij, for being here and enlightening us with your thoughts. I also have a question for Mr. Kronenberg. In what way do you think an election of Le Pen would influence the war in Ukraine the month afterwards? And what could the international community do to fight back the detrimental effects of that?
Well, in a way, first of all, I think it would weaken the, let's say, coherence and the solidarity among the European Union and NATO countries, depending, of course, on the positions that she's going to take. But if you already announced that you're going to withdraw from the military command structure of NATO, that's a huge setback in the current conditions. And I could also imagine that she has some second thoughts about sanctions on Russia. Today, as we speak, I believe, France, Bruno Le Maire, he suggested we should cut the oil imports from Russia. Maybe that President Le Pen would change that position overnight when she's elected. But it would have a wider also psychological impact, I believe, in many European capitals. And would you still feel free to share, let's say, all the intelligence you have and do all the cooperation with a country that's going to be headed by somebody like Marine Le Pen? I have my doubts because she still has quite some links with Russia, as we all know. Of course, she tries to hide them for the time being, but we all know about the fact that she has still a loan she has to pay back to a Russian bank of about 9 million euros. And there may be more things we don't know about. So, it would be a very awkward position for everybody. So I think it's, especially given the current position we are finding ourselves in, I think Moscow would sort of say, yeah, we have a new ally in Europe, apart from Orban. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, please. There's a microphone coming to you.
Thank you very much. And how far would you expect that Le Pen would have the support of Russia to make publicity through public media? Because that subject hasn't been raised yet, but I think there will be, like maybe in the past it happened in the US, that there was quite influencing from Russian side and for the election for Le Pen. What do you think about that?
I don't know whether it's addressed to me or to Jean-Dominique.
Yep.
But I think it would be a huge mistake from Russia if they would sort of show it right now that they support Le Pen, because that would only make her far less popular in the French electorate. But yeah,
you're totally right, Mr. Ambassador, and you know that very well. In fact, we made some decision to exclude Russia Today, Sputnik, and all the propaganda tools of the Russian country from the public debate, and we are very, very careful. Our services, they are very mobilized to assure a free and fair choice of the other people.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yep.
Yes, perhaps
there's online, yes.
Question from our online participants. And this one is connecting the presidential elections to the parliamentary elections that are going to follow in June, asking whether we would, in the case Emmanuel Macron wins the presidentials, will we see also victory in the parliamentary elections, or would he have more difficulties on this side? And maybe we can expand on how would the parliamentary elections hold also on the side of defense and diplomacy, if at all.
Monsieur Giuliani.
No, generally, when a president is elected, he gets a majority in the parliament. Because the French people consider they vote twice. and they vote the same way for the member of the parliament than for the presidential election. This is quite a rule in the French politics, and as you know, the election of the parliament will take place just 1 month later the presidential election. So maybe Macron could have a smaller majority, but not an enemy at the French, a majority enemy at the French parliament.
Thank you. Ed, would you like to add? No? I think you want to ask a question, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Matthijs Schmelzberg, former member of European Parliament. I have a question of interest when it comes up to the cooperation between Germany and France. I've understood that Le Pen wants to withdraw from all kinds of parts of the European Union. It's a very immature energy union, but she wants to step out because there is this famous discussion on purchasing power, pouvoir d'achat. The French, they pay quite a lot of money, which they consider for the production of energy, which is too high. How will this affect the future cooperation between France and Germany, knowing that the Germans, of course, already have their issues with diverging opinions compared to the French when it comes up to the supplies from Russia via Nord Stream 1, but also Nord Stream 2? And I've also a very specific question to you, Mr. Kronenberg. How about China? How can Macron step up his efforts to make China at least be, well, let's say the world power that will not step in and use its power to support one way or another the Russians? Thank you.
I think the first part is addressed to you, Jean-Dominique.
Energy is a very difficult part of the dialogue between France and Germany, because we don't agree on everything. And as you know, the French people, they are in majority in favor of the nuclear energy. And we did that in the past, and we are in the best situation than Germany right now. And the people in France, and including the politicians on the right and the left, they all agree that the German choices were the wrong choice in energy. So the question of the pouvoir d'achat, as you say, is quite a traditional blackmail of the elector before election to the politician in France. And it's not something new. It costs a lot, the French budget, after every election. And right now, with this inflation due to energy and supply chain and coming from Asia and from Russia, it had been a pretext of revendication, but I don't know that we could in France face alone this kind of situation. We are in the EU, we are a member of the Eurozone, and we have a European Central Bank and some rules in common with our partners, so we have to face that together. This is what Macron will do if re-elected, and if not, Marine Le Pen will try to go alone, and it will be a nightmare for France, it will be a nightmare for our economy and for all the European economy, I believe.
No, thank you very much. In the Netherlands, usually when a politician proposes just before elections to lower the VAT, for instance, from 20 to 9%, as was suggested by Mrs. Le Pen, the question of the opposition will immediately be, how are you going to pay for this? So it will be interesting to listen on this debate tomorrow evening, what will be the answer. Thank you. On China, maybe
Yeah.
Mr. Cronenberg.
I'm convinced that China is probably feeling itself in quite an awkward position at this point in time, because I'm assuming that at the very beginning they probably felt, well, if it's only going to be a couple of days, you know, that's what it is. But now, of course, they've been dragged down this terrible road, and they're still supporting Russia, of course, but which is not, as far as I can see, something which is in their favor, because China is undeniably going to suffer from what's happening right now, also from an economic point of view. Sanctions, as they've been applied, are hurting everybody, not just Russia, but also European countries themselves, and will also hurt China, of course, and things will only get worse. Once, for example, it appears that China might be sort of helping out a little bit the Russians with the sanctions. I mean, then they would be hurt themselves, which is not, you know, in their advantage. Of course, they're very sort of onto themselves. They don't want to mix in any sort of foreign adventure. But now they must have probably been asking themselves the question, you know, why haven't we sort of reacted earlier? I would still hope that they would put pressure on Putin, because I think it's the only country in the world, I think Xi Jinping, maybe the only person that still can exercise some influence on the Kremlin. But he shouldn't wait any longer, because otherwise it's too late anyway. And it will have dire repercussions, because the Americans, for one thing, they already have a difficult relationship with China, will only get worse. And the Chinese will suffer from that, whether they like it or not. So common sense would sort of, you know, indicate that they would have to move, but I'm still waiting. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions at this stage? Maybe I can ask a question to you, since the theme of this panel is also defense. What prospects are there for cooperation between the Netherlands and France when it comes to defense? Of course, there is a strong cooperation already, but in view of this political agenda, strategic compass, the discussion in Europe, and assuming that Macron would win, what are the prospects?
Well, if you come back to the main point, I think the European Union, the member states, have to sort of sit together and make an inventory of the capabilities they need and of the capabilities they have. And of course, they are still falling short in many areas. And what's still happening, although we have quite a lot of bilateral cooperation or trilateral cooperation, many countries still do, let's say, all the elements of the defense themselves. And I think it's about time now that we would really get together and say, okay, let's sort of specialize. You're going to do this, I'm going to do that, to make sure that we spend the money we have in a clever way and not duplicate capabilities we already have. That's something that should happen anytime soon, I believe. And then I feel that it's not just between the Netherlands and France, but also with many other countries. We could really also have a very productive European defense industry that's going to supply us with our own capabilities, and also as part of the strategic autonomy we are looking for. And I know that we are talking to the French about very important capabilities as we speak. So I think if President Macron is re-elected, that will bear fruit in the near future.
Yep, absolutely. Very well. Other questions online, maybe?
Maybe then a provocative question that is drawing more to the national debate. I think I have a problem with...
Too provocative.
I'm blocked. It's blocked. Right, I remember the question. Anyways, doesn't matter. So it was whether the debate should not be so much about whether the next French president should position itself, him or herself, in pro-Russia or against Russia, but whether it should be more about, well, more daily topics that are important for people who are about to vote. So it was mentioned the purchasing power and so on. So whether this should not be to the fore. So a bit more of a provocative line.
Monsieur Giuliani? maybe?
No, I told you that there is a rejection of the sort of kind of rejection in a part of the people toward the Macron personality, because he was very cash, very active, and very present at the political scene. But be sure that the image of and the feeling of what Russia is doing in Ukraine is very important for the French people. And the French president is a personality which is at the same time elected people and quite a monarch. It's quite a king in France also. He has the two faces of the Queen of England and the Prime Minister in Netherlands, and at the same time. So the people, the French people, they elect somebody that could be on the international scene, on the European scene, and the people what we have to be proud of. And the Russian war will count a lot in this matter and this election. And also for defense, Ambassador Cronenberg has perfectly said what the people share in France about strategic autonomy, about to be stronger on defense issue, to be free to make our own decision within the alliance and the NATO alliance, but also to be stronger, and we have to be stronger. And the French people, they think that we will be stronger with a president like Macron instead of a president like Le Pen. That's sure. She has a program of credibility on the economic side and also on defense issue and on international affairs.
Thank you very much. I think we're almost finished with the first panel. I would like to first thank you very much, Mr. Yevchenko, for your very strong plea and analysis of the developments in your country, also in view of your personal background. And I think we all can be very, you passed a very good and strong message. And I think also important for this discussion on relations between France and the Netherlands, in particular, of course, the French elections and what is at stake. It makes it even more clear through your testimony. I would like to thank very much Monsieur Giuliani. C'était un honneur et un plaisir de vous revoir.
Un honneur pour moi.
And to have listened to you, and I can recommend also to all here, read the newsletter of Jean-Dominique Giuliani, who has the inheritance of Robert Schuman in his foundation. So thank you so much for being with us, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much. And also I'd like to thank Ambassador Ed Cronenberg for being with us on this very important panel. Conclusions, everybody can draw his own conclusions. My conclusion is that it's an election where so much is at stake that you can only draw one conclusion, that we really hope that the candidate Macron will win. For a moderator, maybe this is a difficult thing to say because I should be impartial, but in this situation, it's clear what the stakes are and how important it is that for the continuity and the stability of Europe that we see where this will go. So thank you very much for all of that, and I suggest we close this panel, and we will move to the second panel. So thank you very much. Welcome to our second panel. The theme of this panel is what the impact of the presidential elections on the French energy and agri-food markets. So actually it's a panel but cut in two different subjects, but some of them may merge, of course, during the debate. And we have two prominent speakers. The first speaker is Monsieur Régis Chancel, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SLU Centrale, which is a corporation between Électricité de France and PZTM. And we are very, very pleased to have you here. Of course, not only knowing everything about France, but also a lot about the Netherlands, I understand, since you work in this joint venture, in this corporation. And the second eminent person is Caspar Hall, whom I know for a long time already. We negotiated many, many years ago on the European budget. Caspar currently is the head of the agroeconomic policies at the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, but previously has also been posted in the Dutch embassy in Paris. He worked actually with Ambassador Kronenberg, and also he was posted earlier on in his career in Ukraine, in Kiev. So thank you very much for being with us, and I suggest we start with the energy part. Well, energy transition is, of course, at the center of the European debate. Despite Ukraine, despite Russia, it's very much in the present. Of course, the Agreement of Paris, the Fit for 55 agenda, decarbonization. Of course, all these issues are there, but at the same time, we have the problem of the gas supplies, energy supplies coming from a country that we have some problems with at the moment, and all the economic and socio-economic repercussions of that. So no better person than to give us an introduction on how this plays out in the French political landscape. I'd like to give you the floor, Monsieur Chancel.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity for sharing some insight regarding the energy sector. I guess we will see with my today colleague Casper that at the end, food and energy sector are facing the same challenge, and at some point they have a similar aspect in terms of market. First one is probably the importance of the share of the food and the energy in the budget for a consumer. And for sure, even if on a day-to-day basis, the energy is not our first concern, at the end of the month, when we see the bill increasing so fast, we start to think that we have to be concerned by this topic. And I think for the food is quite the same. One other similar aspect, I guess, is the fact that it's quite difficult for the government to build a real strong policy, because this market are facing a lot of components, and some of them are outside of our world, I mean outside of the national country, let's say. And it's very difficult when you don't have in your hand the power, the possibility to act on them. It's very difficult to build such a strategy. Energy sector is indeed very important, I guess, like food again, to grow an economy for a country. For sure, if you don't have food, if you don't have energy, then it's very difficult to have a positive and a good economy. In fact, energy sector is facing both structural and economy change. First, we saw that during the last few years, the business has been disrupted with the new players coming, with new technology, but also with new business model, which was not that easy for the historical players to face and to act. We are facing also the position of the consumer, because we can see that the consumer are more and more concerned by the energy, by the climate change, and therefore by the origin of the electricity. in the same time, we can see that the infrastructure is changing a lot. We have more and more new assets like a wind farm, solar panels. Time to time, we can see that due to this new asset, we have to build new high voltage lines. And during the last few years, we can see also that all the national grid have been interconnected. So now it's more and more difficult to speak only from a country. We have to speak for Europe. And it's a challenge, but it's also for sure a chance for us. In addition to all these, let's say, structural parameters, we have also to face some economic change. And we also, last few months, the increase of the commodities, especially with the gas, and the gas has been multiplied by 10 during the last 10 months, which is incredible, since we know that the price of the electricity is based on the gas price. So this is why we saw the price of the electricity increasing from, let's say, 50 euro per megawatt till 200 euro per megawatt, and time to time 1,000, 2,000 for a few times. I mean, for a few hours. So all this is quite difficult, and it's also difficulties for our politicians because they have to manage all these parameters, and especially in the case of the energy market, we all know that the energy market is a long-term market. We have to take a decision now, but the decision will be implemented after 5-10 years. Why? Because we have to launch the discussion with the public to be sure that they will accept the new asset. Best example is the wind farm. After this, we have to require the permitting, and normally the permitting, to get the permitting, it's a long process. It looks like in France it's even longer than in some other countries, and we need 2-3 years even for a wind farm and to get the permitting. So it's a longer term business. It's a capex demanding business. We are not talking about hundreds kilo euro, and we are talking about millions and time to time billions of euro. So it's quite also difficult to finance this. And also it's business which impact our day-to-day life. So for sure, everybody is concerned and everybody try to give his view. So when we say this, then we have to think about the politicians, how they can make the best policy regarding this matter. And I think it's quite difficult for them because there is difficulties in terms of timing, because I just said that this market is a long-term decision market, whilst the people are elected for, let's say, 5 years, 7 years. So there is a discrepancy in between the market itself and the agenda and the schedule of the mandate of the elected people. So it's quite difficult to have the right people, the right program for the right decision, let's say. So it's also why it's very important to take the time to analyze, to investigate the program of the last 2 candidates for this election, to see first probably the sincerity of the program, the feasibility. When I say feasibility, means the capacity they will have to implement the program in terms of technology, let's say, in terms of finance, in terms of skill available on the market. You all know that we face in France some difficulties to build this famous EPR, and one of the reasons is because we have a lack of skill, a lack of competence on the territory. So it's very important to take all this into account, and also for sure the capacity to finance, because again it's a capex demanding business. So it's nice to have a list of best wishes, let's say, but if we are not able to implement and to finance them, then it will be just an opportunity for the people to dream to a wonderful world, but it will be impossible for us to implement this program. So it's very important to go a little bit more into the detail to face this possibility to implement the program. And it's not only, again, not only the fact that we are going next Sunday to choose the president for the next 5 years, but for me, it's more the capacity we will have to reach this green transition and to give to our children the possibility to have a better world, to grow, and to be able to live in a, let's say, a better condition. So I hope all together we will go a little bit more into the details of the program of the last two candidates and to see what could be the best candidate to implement the best program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I suggest we go straight to Mr. Hall, and then we will do the answers and questions on the two subjects. So, Kaspar,
yeah, sure.
The floor is yours on agri-food.
Absolutely, thank you, guys. And there are indeed some similarities between the energy and the agri-food markets. That is clear. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. As been already introduced, I had the chance to be a diplomat in both Kiev and Paris. So for me, a lot of things come together tonight, so I'm honored to be here. And if there's one thing I remember from my time in Kiev, I was there from 2007 to 2009. So when I came, January 2007, it was a booming economy, lots of foreign capital flowing into Ukraine. Then we had a little issue called Lehman Brothers and a financial crisis in 2008. And all foreign investment left the country, left Ukraine overnight. So the first big IMF program had to be invented again, reinvented basically for Ukraine in 2008. And this huge economic crisis hit the population right in the face. There was an emerging middle class. People were, the country was really waking up and growing. And you saw the resilience of the Ukrainian people. There was no sense of entitlement of this growth. They just accepted the fact that it was all gone. And they went back to the countryside, to their grandmothers, and eat cabbage. And I know it's a sort of a simplified image, but this is the image that I take away from Ukraine, of very resilient people that always are looking forward to new opportunities and they are patient. So this resilience, let's hope that the Ukrainians will remain in this position. But now for something completely different, food and agri. So farmers, food, and agriculture is in France obviously very political. It's politically everywhere, but it's in France even a bit more political than in most other countries in the world. And one of the illustrations is the famous French farmers protesting. We've all seen them. I think they're a political constant. And there's even some French historians that say even the French Revolution was started by farmers because of high taxes and bad living circumstances. So protesting French farmers have been a constant through history, but that's not the only reason why it's political. It's also the civilization, the citizens, and the society in France that is very much valuing food and food production and farming. And I was lucky enough to experience that for 4 years as a diplomat in Paris. So, and in this, I think there's a big difference with the Netherlands, but we'll talk about it if it's necessary. The culture of food and farming is very present in France, and therefore, during all elections in France, the farmers play an important role, and food production plays an important role. The similarities, and I think it's important, I won't talk too long, but just 2 minutes on where we are with farming in the Netherlands and in EU and France. Farming or agriculture as a percentage of GDP has become quite small in the last decades, and as a percentage of employment, for example, has become really small in the last decades. At the same time, we've seen in all EU countries huge steps in terms of technological development, productivity growth, economies of scale. So a lot less farmers create a lot more produce on the same land. And this huge increases in productivity, they are sort of tipping out at the moment. We're sort of we're reaching a point where the productivity gains are getting smaller, but more importantly, we're reaching the limits, the ecological limits, the limits of basically the earth. And in the Netherlands, it is quite clear in terms of our nitrogen debate that we all know if you're living here, but also the climate debate, for which France, of course, is a very fierce supporter. we've seen that we're reaching the limits of what the earth can support in terms of agricultural production. And therefore this sustainability issue, and in France it's called agroecologie, in the Netherlands we call it kringlooplandbouw, circular agriculture, but basically the idea that food production and agriculture should be in balance with the natural environment has become a most prominent policy framework and basically the guide for the agricultural transition. So that's the big similarity. And now we are in a situation where 2 years ago, we had COVID, and we are all looking around what does COVID mean for example, our food supply, our supply chains. And already then, and Mr. Kronenberg mentioned the vision of Macron on strategic autonomy, and that was even pre-COVID. The discussions in France were starting about food sovereignty. We need more national food sovereignty. We should be reliant on ourselves in terms of providing our own citizens with food. An idea which, until quite recently in the Netherlands, has not really taken hold, but in France it's been there. We should be able to take care of our own citizens in France. So this food sovereignty is a second policy goal next to the goal of transition and sustainability. Macron is very clear. He says, in terms of innovation, investing in new technologies, we can have these two goals hand in hand. So by investing in innovation and technology, we can ensure productivity, we can ensure enough food production while at the same time being sustainable. And if you look at the other candidate, Le Pen, it is a lot less clear in the sense that her idea of agriculture is much more, maybe we should call it old-fashioned. In the Netherlands, there's a nice expression, we call it oud en sien landbouw, which means that basically we're moving back to the 50s. We have a very romantic view of small farms with people working on their own land, providing the neighbors with food, everything is from close. And this is, of course, a reflection of Le Pen's idea on France's role also in the world markets. She doesn't like the European Commission, she doesn't like the WTO, World Trade Organization. She's very skeptical of trade agreements. So the whole idea that you can grow your agribusiness and your agricultural system and make it part of a global food supply chain, that is not something that is embraced by Marine Le Pen. Let's put it diplomatically. So I think that's an important difference between. So we are now with the two challenges. An important difference between Le Pen and Macron is that Macron really embraces innovation and technological development for the agricultural sector for the dual challenges, whereas Marine Le Pen basically is more into the. She's trying to make it more personal. She's in her campaign. She's talked about the forgotten farmers and La France profonde. She went to the countryside and tried to be very empathetic towards the French farmers, but not really providing concrete solutions. And if she did, and she does in her program, then let's say they do not contribute to either of the two goals, really, and at least not to sustainability. So she doesn't really like all the European rules for pesticides and for all those things. So we don't really need them in France. That's her opinion. So there we are, and I think what is very important now, and I'll finish off with that, is the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has obviously increased the sense of urgency in terms of food sovereignty, but also it has made more concrete the idea that we should produce more in order to make sure that we do not have food security issues globally, worldwide, and every single country has their own responsibility to do that. At the same time, this argument has been used, and I would have to say misused, by a lot of countries, but also by Monsieur Macron in Brussels, to say, look, the farm-to-fork strategy, where we make our European food system more sustainable, it's very important, we'll have to do it, but we'll put it on hold right now, because what is more important, we need to produce more to prevent food security. So the food sovereignty issue is now taking the first stage, and the sustainability issue is taking a back position. So we'll see where that goes, because we see other countries using the same arguments, and those countries were never in favor of the sustainability transition in the first place, and they use very cynically the current situation with Russia to say we need to focus on food production, even though we know there is no food security issue in the European Union, there's no food security issue in France or in the Netherlands. There is one in the north of Africa and in some specific areas where the Ukrainian grain and maize and products go. But in general, there is enough food. There's a food distribution issue and there's a welfare issue, but there's not a food security issue as such. So it's a little bit of a difficult argument, but we can discuss that later. So I'll leave it maybe there as an introduction. Okay. Otherwise, I'm too long-winded, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we have two juxtapositioned themes, but they both also are connected in somehow. Maybe I can start asking a question to Mr. Chancel. Energy prices. That is, I think, one of the big issues also in this campaign. We will certainly see it tomorrow evening in the debate between the two candidates. But both their approaches are very different. President Macron seems to invest, in alternatives, in technology when it comes to energy, and Mrs. Le Pen seems to be saying, well, we should reduce the VAT and things like that. From the sector itself, seen from the sector itself, as is in your case, what is because you take the long view, but this is a short-term pressure. What can politicians do?
Good question, and for sure the electricity price is a real concern, as I expressed during my short introduction. Can you imagine that in some countries the price of the electricity increased by 40%, even 100% within few months, which is incredible. And we succeed to limit this increase in France by 4%. Thanks to some economic decision taken by government of Mr. Macron. Why we face this situation? It's mainly due to the price of the gas, because due to the electricity market, the electricity price is mainly based on the gas price. Why? Because normally we base the price of the electricity with the last asset cold to generate the electricity, and normally the last generation is produced by the combined cycle, which are running with gas. So as soon as the gas increase, you increase the price of the electricity. In fact, so the idea to decrease this electricity increase, or the volatility of the price of the electricity, the first answer can be to reduce our dependency with the gas. So the idea is to build a better mix, a better energy mix, using, yes, that for sure, more nuclear and more renewables. So if you have a look on the programs, you can see on one hand the program of Marine Le Pen. She explained that, okay, she will take as a huge pillar the nuke, and she said, okay, we are going to build, let's say, 20 new EPR reactors within, let's say, or by 2035. Okay. In the same time, she said, okay, we are going to stop the subsidies of the renewables, stop all the pending project, and even we are going to dismantle the wind farm. So here, this is my first, I would like to say, reaction, maybe only a question, should I say. I don't see the economic reason or interest for such a decision. We have here few wind farms producing energy without any carbon emission, producing electricity at a good price. Why we are going to dismantle this asset? If we dismantle this asset, that means we will replace them, we will replace this energy by some other energy. And the energy will come from, for sure, combined cycle or from imported electricity, probably from Germany. And as we know, the main part of the Germany electricity is generated by coal-fired power plant. So I don't see the economic interest. I don't see the environmental interest. So it's not a serious, let's say, action in this program. If we go a little bit further with the renewables, with Marine Le Pen, she said, okay, we are going to focus on hydropower plant. I think this is a good idea. Unfortunately, in France, the hydro potential is very short now. We already built a lot of dam, and we may have very few small hydropower plants, but it cannot be a pillar for a real serious energy politics. She said also that, okay, she removed from her program the fact that she's going to get out from the Europe, but she said, we are going to reduce drastically the share of the French in the budget of Europe. Okay, so that means almost the same. She said also to finalize my first analysis of this program. She said, okay, we are going to review our objectives based on the success of the other country. And I'm not sure in terms of climate change that it's a good dynamic. We have to be a leader. We have to demonstrate that we do a lot to be sure that all the other countries will follow us, and not to wait that some other people or some other countries will do the job for us. So all this to say that in general, economically speaking, to implement this program, I think it's absolutely not realistic. On the other side, we can see a program with Emmanuel Macron, quite clear, strong enough, with two clear pillars. The first one is the nuke, and the other one is the renewables. For the first one, the nuke, he said, okay, we are going to build 5 EPR reactors by 2035, I think he said. And we are going to study the possibility for other 8 for the next step. Regarding the renewables, he said, okay, we are going to multiply by 10 the capacity for the solar panels, and also we are going to build about 50 new wind farms. So there is something very clear. He said also, okay, we are going to work on the innovation, a little bit like for food also, but not working on all the subject. We are going to focus on one subject, which is the hydrogen, and not the gray hydrogen, only the green hydrogen. Means electrolyze with using electricity coming from renewables. So again, here you can see a program clear with a milestone. Also about the finance, and he start to discuss the finance, and you can see this within the plan, the famous 2030 France plan, in which you can see the real way to finance, and he clearly said that the government will be strongly part of the way to finance this project. And he also clearly said that, okay, we need some private equity to finance this project, because we all know that it will be a massive investment. I heard that it will be probably, and talking about climate change as a whole, the finance will be about 3 to 4% of GDP for the next 30 years. So for sure, our governments cannot do this by themselves. We will need the private sector to support financially this program. So again, it's difficult to judge and to give direction, but I'm afraid that we will reach the same conclusion than with the first session. You have one list of best wishes, and on the other side we have something realistic, pragmatic, and I think with a nice view with Europe. I mean, the idea of Macron is not to build a wonderful energy mix only for France. You have to think globally as a Europe continent.
Thank you very much. Maybe a question to Mr. Hall. You mentioned, basically, if I sum up the two approaches by the two candidates, one looks at agri-food and the food sector through modernization and innovation, and the other candidate more through a protectionist agenda. Is it that black and white, or is it? Do you see some lights there?
So that depends on your perspective. I think from within France, I think you could probably say it that black and white. If you look from the outside, then we would still consider Macron also to be protectrice, a little bit, how do you call it? Protectionist. So it depends on your perspective. I think within the French context, yes. And for example, this issue of food sovereignty, both candidates use the same word, food sovereignty. So in that sense, the difference is not a complete black and white difference. They are both underlining the importance of a certain type of food sovereignty, which is an issue that in the Netherlands has never been politicized until maybe now with the upcoming of a new sort of farmer party. But up until recently, it has never been a political issue in the Netherlands. Whereas the two candidates that on a lot of issues are quite far apart, on the goal of food sovereignty, they're sort of almost aligned, I would say. Yeah. But then the big difference is, what's the approach? How do you look at your sector? How do you look at your farming? How do you look at your not only as farmers, but also as an important part of your economy and a part of your country, and being part of a European system and of a global system. And that clearly is the Macron view, as in energy, where it's not only about a French solution, but it's being part of a European system and being part of a global food system. And the investments that that Macron is proposing in agro-technology, they're looking at financing startups. It's very innovative. That is clearly linked to other European countries and the rest of the world. It's not necessarily France-centered. So the issue of food autonomy is also not necessarily a nationalistic issue. It can also be EU internal market, for example. And then you talk about the reliance on the imports of proteins from North and South America and issues like this. So it depends on your perspective.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the audience if there are any questions or comments? Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you. It seems to me that both gentlemen are fully aligned with Macron's vision and on the globalization. And I was wondering what disruptive change it will give if Marine Le Pen is going to be the next president.
Good question. Monsieur Chancel.
It's difficult because, again, in the program you have the list of the best wishes, and then you have to analyze the sincerity of and the reality and the feasibility of the things. I'm afraid the worst thing will be the fact that yes, at short term, she will decide to get out from Europe. And again, without Europe, you cannot do anything. So it will be a mess to provide and to supply the gas. It will be difficult to have a global view for the greenhouse gas emission. Everything will be disruptive, and it will be really a mess to achieve a real nice energy mix. So this is the best thing I can see on this topic.
Very positive image.
And from the food perspective?
There, the image is a little bit different, I think, because what we're looking for right now, not only in France but in the EU, we are looking for disruption in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, the climate objectives. We need, in the agricultural sector, we need a quite disruptive transition. And so our policies are geared towards disruption. And I think if Marine Le Pen ends up as president, I think this disruption in agriculture in France will not take place. I think she's quite protective, but conservatrice also, so she would like to keep the old farming practices as they are. So I think a lot of farmers that are really stuck in old ways and doing the same things on their small farm as their grandfather did, I think they would welcome Le Pen and nothing disruptive will happen. But then there's a problem within the European Union because we are trying to move all of us in the same direction. Either she tries to leave quickly. If that doesn't happen, then France will be isolated with maybe, I don't know, Orban or some others that are sort of isolated in the EU in terms of the global policy shift that we're right now doing. So, and always, if something like this happens, we've seen it with Brexit. Nobody thought Brexit would happen. Well, most of us didn't. Then it happened, and you see a complete closing of the ranks of the rest of the European Union. From day one of Brexit, we've been a united front in the EU vis-à-vis the UK. This is something that can happen as well in terms of disruption. If Marine Le Pen will be present and makes moves like this, you will see Germany slightly lost for words for a couple of weeks or months, and then come up with a plan to, together with the Netherlands and the Scandinavian countries and the Baltics, come up with a new European plan without France. So that's a disruption on a different scale that will happen. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. Other questions?
Yes, Sandrine Larrey from Hague Corporate Affairs. I would like to challenge Mr. Chancel a little bit, because you said that Macron's plan was very much more realistic, especially if we look at the investment plan for the renewables. But isn't that at odds with what's happening on the field? Because indeed you have some commitment in his program to renewables, wind and solar especially. But then what you see is that people at local and regional level are also much more opposed to those projects. A lot of people don't want wind farms in their backyard, which is also one of the reasons why Marine Le Pen is proposing to get rid of all of them altogether. So how realistic is it really on renewables from Macron's side?
Again, there is no magic energy mix. It depends on your country, it depends on your location, it depends on your current infrastructure, it depends on the feasibility of your project, it depends on the skill available on the market. And again, I don't think that the program of Marine Le Pen is really built to have a strong energy mix, to be sure that we will comply with all the signed agreements, to be sure that we will support the decarbonization industry. I think it's just a list of best wishes and without any real way of thinking. Macron, again, he tried to have a balanced energy mix. For sure, with the historical past of France, we cannot remove from one day to another one the nuke share of the energy mix. So he said, okay, for sure, nuclear power will be a strong pillar for the energy of the future. But he knows also that we have some real potential in terms of renewables. And we have the longest shore in Europe. So I think probably we have real potential in terms of off-grid, offshore wind farm. And it's not a wish like this or an action. He decided to launch a real project. You saw probably, I think it was last week, with the support of EDF, we launched a wonderful hydrogen project. And the idea, again, is not to do hydrogen like this, it's the green hydrogen with the support of some industry already involved in the electrolyzer. So it's something very concrete. It's not something like a wish. He said also, okay, we understand that people doesn't want to see in the landscape thousands of wind farms. So he decided, okay, probably to reduce the project regarding the onshore wind farm. But offshore, he said, okay, probably we have more and more potential. So again, it's something very balanced, taking into account the acceptance of the public. And also, again, with the finance behind this and the support of the big industry. So I think it's something very strong, serious, reachable, let's say, and taking into account, yes, again, the acceptance of the people.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. I had one small question for Mr. Hall. If I'm not mistaken, French farmers or farmers as a whole are pretty dependent on EU subsidies, right? So maybe after Sunday it would not be disruptive if Marine Le Pen is elected, because, well, the subsidies will flow for a couple of years maybe, but for the longer term, wouldn't it be extremely disruptive for farmers if Marine Le Pen would be elected? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so true, in the sense that the European budget has a very large part of it reserved for agriculture. We've always looked at, as from a Dutch perspective, as a very French budget. So that's a different discussion. We'll go into that on a different time.
Yes.
At the same time, if you're a president, you can make the choice not to contribute to the EU, but to contribute directly to your own farmers. So you have to take into account how much money you will save by not paying the EU and how much money you get to spend on other things yourself. This is the Boris Johnson rhetoric, basically. The National Health Service is now booming because of the Brexit. It's not the case, but at least that was the promise.
This is ironic.
Thank you. So Marine Le Pen will be faced with a choice upon, and now we're talking about a Frexit. I don't know if that's but anyway, if she decides that there's no EU funds anymore for French farmers, then she'll have to put something else in place herself, and that's very expensive. Because indeed France receives a lot of agricultural support from the EU budget. But as I said, they also pay a lot to the EU budget. So there's the trade-off for the president.
Yeah. Okay, other questions at this stage? Then I would have a question. One of the, and it's again the link with the war in Ukraine, that all the predictions seem to go in the direction that there will be severe consequences for the crops growing in the largest granary of the world, probably, both in Russia but also in Ukraine. And even if there is a crop yield, then there are no ships to transport it, so it have to come by train, but it's much more limited. So the predictions by the World Food Organization are that it will be dramatic, particularly for Africa. Yeah. If that would happen, it would put an enormous pressure on migration towards the southern part of Europe, and we have seen that, of course, in recent years. What would be the possibility if you know France and you look at France having an enormous interest in controlling that? Would they be in favor of or supporting strongly a European program or European plans to compensate and to do something about it? Maybe even together with a country like China, because China has also an enormous interest in keeping its own markets in Africa alive. Yeah. No, in view of all the investments. So, I mean, this is a bit macro, but how would you look at that?
Well, I mean, it's a crucial question for the EU at the moment, and we keep on hammering, we're keeping on stating that there's no short-term food security issues within the EU, which is fine. We have lots of supplies of grain, maize, all the etc. And so we're looking at reducing our reliance, exactly as with the gas and oil, we're reducing our reliance of other countries, also in terms of protein. But there is a real threat of a food security crisis in Northern Africa. And the question is, what can you do about it now? And for me, it's clear, and France, they have been vocal, but not too vocal. I mean, when there would be no presidential elections, I think we would have and of course France also has the presidency of the EU, which limits your ability to keep putting forward national standpoints normally. It depends on the presidency a little bit. I think under normal circumstances, France would have been more active in proposing a European approach towards food security in Africa. They are still active on this front, but they see there's a lot of pushback in the EU because people are honestly concerned also about food security in general and in the EU. But the threat of migration, and it's always difficult to talk about that in terms of when there's a war going on in Ukraine and when we all know there's enough grain to feed ourselves. So it feels a bit self-centered to talk about the threat of migration, while the real threat is in hunger.
Of course.
And there are programs in place, and France is quite active on this front. They have always been very active in the FAO, so the UN Food Organization, but also in the EU. At the same time, the EU's capacity to do something about food security in Northern Africa is relatively limited. In the end, it will be a financial issue, a financial economic issue, because basically what happens in Egypt, countries like this, they have a guaranteed bread price by the government, which means that in order to feed the population, the bread prices will remain sort of constant and the rest will be financed by the governments. They are already highly indebted because of the crisis we had. So we've a number of countries that are almost at the brink of bankruptcy. They have to finance now the bread consumption of their own population. So in the end, how cynical it may be, it's not an issue of is there enough grain, but the question is there enough money or solidarity to support Northern Africa?
Yeah, okay.
And France usually is quite supportive of that, but has tough other EU countries that it has to deal with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the audience at this stage? Online? Nobody online?
One here, I guess.
Yes.
If you would be Mr. Macron, how would you convince the people that think they are more or better off with a more protectionist agenda? So in other words, what would be your strategy for a victory?
On energy?
It's difficult to try to have the seat of Mr. Macron first because I'm too old. But no, I think again, take the time to read the program and try to think how difficult it is to implement the program. Try to think about the future. Can we go alone? Can we go? Can we? Yes, for the food, but also for the energy. Are we able to run our market alone? Are we able to grow our economy alone? Do you think there is only one possibility to produce energy? I don't think I can imagine 100% of nuke. So that means you will be totally dependent with the uranium provider. If you go 100% renewables, okay, you will be totally dependent with the intermittency of the renewables. So again, we have to be balanced, and we have to think the feasibility and the sincerity of the program. And I think if all the people take the time to have this way of thinking and to read the program, I think they will choose the right one. Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, for farming, it's not easy if you're Macron and you want to connect with French farmers, because you are. We've talked about it in the previous session. He is seen as sometimes as an elitist, but he's clearly a city guy with nice suits. He's used to Paris. He is Paris. So if you're then in La France Profonde, if you're somewhere in the Provence and talking to small farmers, then to find a connection is much more difficult for him than for perhaps Marine Le Pen, who, even though economically it's quite easy to shoot holes in her program, and everybody who can read and knows a little bit about economics knows that it's quite dangerous to go towards the path of Le Pen. To make this connection is not that easy for Macron. So, I mean, I'm an economist. I would just stick to the facts and basically say, look, we need a thriving business and a connection to the European Union and global markets to provide a sustainable future for France. But that's a very academic argument that's not necessarily guaranteed electoral success in the French countryside. So that's not an answer, because actually it's a good question, and I'm just happy I'm not Monsieur Macron.
Okay, other questions at this stage? Then I may have a question for Monsieur Chancel, and it has to do with European pipelines and grids between countries. And I recall from my time when I served as the Dutch ambassador in Spain that there is an old issue of the non-connection of certain pipelines and electricity grids to France over the Pyrenees. Now you took the long view, right? The long investment. And if we get less gas out of Russia for the reasons we know, and we need to import more from Algeria, and we also have to have it transferred to the northern part of Europe, how are the possibilities there? How do I don't know how the candidates look at these things, because these are, of course, long-term things, and they've been with us for a long time. But how would that let's say, put some pressure on it in the present situation in view of the gas problem with Russia?
Yes, again, I think we don't have to force decision, even if technically speaking, we think that it can be a good idea to have another pipeline coming from Spain. If people don't want this pipe, okay, so then we have to find another solution. And talking about gas, I think we have plenty of solutions. We can secure some alternative supplier, but we can also think about new fuels. We have LNG, for example. As I said, and France has the longest shore in Europe. You can install a lot of platform to welcome LNG. Yep. So there's plenty of possibility. You have biomass, you have hydrogen. So it's not because you want to cut off the gas coming from Russia that you have to replace it by another gas.
Okay, yeah. Clear. Very well. Do you have a view on that? Having been in France, I mean.
You mean specifically on energy or?
No, on the pipelines and grids. Not specific.
I remember reading it in the French press,
okay.
and being surprised by it, but I have no opinion on it.
Good.
No.
All right. I look again. Yes, please, Madame.
Is Europe really dependent on fertilizers coming from Russia and Ukraine? Because that's what I read in the French papers. They would like to produce more now, but they miss the fertilizers.
Yeah,
good question.
That is a good question. So there is indeed a lot of import in the EU from Russia in terms of fertilizers. And this is very much linked to the energy question, because the fertilizers are made by fossil fuels. So is it possible for the EU to produce the same without Russian fertilizers? Yes. It's more expensive, it's slower, so we take time to adapt, and it drives the prices up. So yes, there is a dependence, but it's not a black and white dependency. And these things tend to get overstated in the press sometimes, like, okay, without Russia we cannot, it's the same with gas and with all kinds of other things. So there's a nuanced picture, but it's absolutely true that there is a reliance on Russian fertilizers, and people are frantically looking now for alternatives, either producing them themselves, and that's one of the things that both Netherlands and France are arguing for in Brussels. And it sounds a bit strange, but to use manure, so the real stuff, to replace the artificial fertilizers. And so basically what you can do with the dry matter from the cow excrement, you can use in terms of as fertilizer without some of the detrimental effects of using the manure. Well, it's a bit technical, I don't know all the details, but at least we need a change in EU legislation for this, because it's close to the water directive and the nature directive, so we have to make sure that it's in line. But this is one concrete measure we could take right now to reduce our dependency on Russian fertilizers, and we're talking about that in Brussels at the moment.
Okay. I would have another question to you, Casper. In view of all the pressures that we now see on our continent, there is, of course, already a strong collaboration between France and the Netherlands when it comes to agri and food. What possibilities are there, also with the view to the Paris Agreement and the CO2 reduction, to increase that even further? Because we are, maybe in terms of energy, not the biggest in the EU, but in terms of agro, we're very big.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of potential there. And of course, it depends on who will be the next president in France, because I think that changes the picture a little bit. But I explained the policy of Macron through innovation, wanting to have both be more productive and be more sustainable. And this matches very well with Dutch policy. which means that our policy environments are similar. The French agroecologie is very close to our circular agriculture, which means that the programs that we're developing are very similar. And we both know that in both countries, in France and in the Netherlands, are some of the leading agricultural technology firms. So there's lots of foreign well, it's not even foreign because it's within the EU, but a lot of investments flowing between the two countries. There's a big investment plan, part of the 2030 plan by President Macron, to finance tech startups, and the Dutch are already looking to profit from that and to participate in that as well. There's a lot of corporate. For example, Danone, a big French food company, has the research center here in Utrecht. I think it's the biggest European insect, or even worldwide insect producer, which is very high tech. It's a high technology to create proteins from insect. They're from France, and they bought the biggest Dutch insect firm, and now together they're world leading in terms of high technology, getting proteins from insects. So there's lots of things going on, and huge potential to increase that. So yes.
Okay, well,
the answer is yes.
Yeah, no, that's very positive.
Yeah,
and maybe also a question to Monsieur Chancel on the cooperation between the Netherlands and France in the field of energy. How do you see it? Because you're of course the persona who is in the middle of such a cooperation, but more broadly, the Netherlands government has said it's open again to nuclear power stations. We have to see how that will work out, but the discussion is open again. To give one example, how do you see that?
We have, if I may say, sorry, we have already a long-term experience, and my company is a good example, and because since for more than 10 years now, 12 years now exactly, we have a partnership in between a Dutch company and a French company, and even during the period a little bit difficult, I mean during the 2014, 2015, we were talking about to close the company or to mothball the company, and at the end we succeed all together to decide to keep running the business, and nowadays we are very happy to have taken this decision. So we have already good experience. Talking about the nuke, yes, for sure, in France we have a long experience with more than 50 reactors, but you have also one reactor in Netherlands. So I think we have the same approach. I mean, we were coming from a more independent situation, Netherlands and also France. Coming from this situation, going to a more dependent situation. So we have the same pragmatic and realistic approach, nuke plus renewables. And probably it's a nuke plus renewables for France, and it's renewables plus nuke for Netherlands. But at the end, this is the same. Talking about hydrogen also, I was mentioning the hydrogen project. I know that in Netherlands we have also a project for a big investment in the infrastructure for hydrogen, to produce hydrogen, to transport hydrogen, but also to store hydrogen. So I think again it can be a good project to share with France. So I'm pretty optimistic regarding the partnership we can build together with Netherlands. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions or any comments online? Then I think yes. Yes, please.
Maybe one question on agriculture, or actually food and agriculture. More recently, Emmanuel Macron mentioned that if he's elected, he would like to promote a new farm-to-fork strategy at European level. Do we know what that entails and could mean?
Well, this has to be seen in light of the war in Ukraine. And the idea behind it is that Emmanuel Macron wants to propose a farm-to-fork strategy that takes more into account the importance of increasing production also in the EU, instead of only focusing on reducing the burden on the environment and creating a more sustainable food production. So that's what it means. We've already seen that the Commission has reacted a little bit by postponing 2 elements to legislative proposals within the farm-to-fork strategy and not publishing them now, but waiting, which was a disappointment for us because we don't really agree with the position of Emmanuel Macron on this, which is fine. That's what happens in the EU. So this is the call from France, and this is joined by some other countries, so we have to see. For now, we put faith in the European Commission to stick to the ambitious goals of the farm-to-fork strategy. And these goals are ultimately shared by Emmanuel Macron. It's just which way do you want to approach towards these goals, and how do you balance the 2 objectives that I talked about earlier. Yeah.
Okay. Yes? Okay. I think we need drinks. We need drinks, huh? We are, yeah. Let's, if there are no more questions, I think we're all a bit thirsty, right, Peter? And I would like to thank the 2 interlocutors very much. Merci beaucoup. I think it's been extremely useful to go a little bit deeper into the aspects, not only of the programs of the 2 candidates, but also understanding these vast areas of economic activity in a political framework which is dominated by a war in Europe. So we are all very much focused on these issues. And of course, some of the issues will emerge undoubtedly tomorrow in the debate, and of course on Sunday in the election itself. But I wanted to thank you very much, and also the public, the audience, to having been with us, and all those online. I think it was a very productive and excellent exchange. We have to see how things will evolve in the geopolitical and security area. I think there are some challenges and maybe some worries, but let's hope that reason will prevail. And obviously in the, let's say, the deep areas of daily life, which is energy and food, also we will see that, as I think Sir Chancel said, there is the wish list and there is the reality. So let's hope that the reality will be more convergent with the wish list. So thank you very much. And I think on behalf of Peter, I can invite everybody to have a drink. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, Kees van Rij, for this excellent moderation. Thanks very much for being with us tonight. A big thank you to our panelists. Not everyone is here anymore, but thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights and your expertise with us. I think it will be even more interesting now to follow the debate, the news for the next coming days. Of course, tomorrow evening there's le grand débat between Macron and Le Pen, and I think this will help us even more to follow and to know what to look at. I also think that we got some smooth voting advice here and there, but yeah, smooth or not so smooth. Thank you so much to the The Hague team. Thank you for this nice collaboration. We had a great co-organization for this evening. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Sandrine. I know there's Maud, Daan, and Katinka. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter ter Horst. Also, a big thank you to Nieuwsport for receiving us tonight and for the smooth techniques. For all the people joining from home, thanks very much for your participation. Thank you for your questions. For anyone who would like to see the debate, we have recorded and we will send you the link to all the recordings so you can also follow the debate in the replay. And for the audience here, well, thank you so much for being here. And I would like to invite you in the patio here. We have drinks and bites, and we have Pierre et les optimistes that are waiting for you. And last but not least, you've all received this little flyer. If you would like to stay connected, if you want to follow the news on politics and communications, this is the LinkedIn account from Hey Company, and just follow it and you will be aware of everything that's happening. So I wish you a nice continuation in the patio. And for the people at home, thank you so much and have a nice evening. Thanks.